the MS Michigan Man 64 podcast. My name is Brian Wallace, and I am the MS Michigan Man 64. The MS Michigan Man 64 podcast is about chronic disease awareness. I have had multiple sclerosis for the last 27 years. It's an invisible chronic disease that I've been battling for half of my life. I want to share with you what it is like living with the chronic disease from my experiences and the experiences of other chronic disease warriors. We can fight to have a voice to those that want to listen. Together, we can motivate and educate. Hi, welcome to the MS Michigan Man 64 podcast. Today it is the month of April still, and I wanted to sit down with my stepdaughter who is on the autism spectrum to help spread awareness for autism. Please welcome to the podcast, Maddie. How are you doing today, Maddie?
I'm doing good.
Good. Maddie, we met each other. You were about 12 years old. It was about 12 years ago, actually. And I know that when I met your mom and she told me that you were on the autism spectrum, I really did not have any idea about autism. You know, everybody's perception, it kind of like with my disease, MS, you always think the worst and you think of somebody with MS in a wheelchair. And my thoughts on autism were the same way. I know that there's severe autism that aren't high functioning, and you are a very high functioning a person on the autism spectrum, but I know that you still had your struggles. Can you kind of like just explain what autism is from your knowledge of it, being a 25-year-old lady, and what your life was like growing up from your memory of being on the autism spectrum?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's hard to like pinpoint exactly what autism is because it is as a spectrum. So there is a wide like range of presentations that you can see with it. But I think to answer your one question, the major thing that like I noticed growing up was that maybe I didn't notice it so much growing up, but I started to realize a bit later. Was like I just had different like associations with like everything that was going on around me. Like I reacted differently to it than someone else might. But I think I owe a lot of like where I am in life now, and just to be able to consider myself as high functioning as I can. I owe a lot of that to my mother. I think the early intervention that she did in just identifying what what was going on with me when I was young, getting me into therapy right away, and then just trying to constantly push me, outside of my, my boundaries and experience new things, but also be there as like a safety net if I needed. So it was always encouraging to try new things and to, challenge what I thought I could do or what I thought was safe.
Right. So let me ask you this, Maddie. From when you were growing up, I know that like I've heard the stories from your mom. I wasn't around in your early childhood days, but I know that you had a lot of sensory issues like the lights or whether it was your clothes. I know your mom said that she had a hard time keeping clothes on you when you were a toddler. She would get you dressed and then she would turn her head and the next thing she knew, you had all your clothes off. So can you kind of explain that part of it? I mean, the sensory issue part. I mean, it like that bothers you. You just can't stand that feeling on your skin.
Yeah. So it is kind of hard to describe for someone who isn't experiencing the sort of sensory processing difficulties that can come with autism. I'm not sure if it's necessarily like always associated with autism or it's just like a spectrum based thing. But I know it's like a pretty common like concern in people with autism is the sensory processing.
Hmm.
But it's like it's like that flight or fight response.
Hmm.
So it's something as little as like just a tag on your clothing.
Hmm.
It triggers that like adrenaline rush of like you're gonna die,
Got it.
and that just really takes over, your brain, especially, when I'm younger and I don't have as much, like control of emotion and
Right.
thought and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It is quite overwhelming and irresistible to, you know, do whatever I have to do to get rid of
Of
those,
that feeling. Yeah.
sensory. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And it's the same thing. I know your mom said, like, even to the fact, like, when she cut your nails, your toenails, your fingernails, you can actually feel the nail being cut. And like if I cut my nail, I don't feel that, but you actually feel that. Your sensory issues, you feel that.
Yeah. So like, it can vary. So like some people have like greatly increased reaction to sensory stimulus, and some people have greatly decreased reaction, and it can vary too based on like the type of stimulus. So for me, I remember that heavier or like more forceful uh, touch stimulus was fine,
Mm-hmm.
and I found that comforting.
Mm-hmm.
But lighter sensations were actually like painful a lot of times. So that's kind of what the nail cutting thing was about. Just the little light sensory that you would get like on the edges of your skin and stuff while the nail is being cut.
Mm.
That would be incredibly painful for me.
Got it. Yeah. It's like magnified almost to you, like
Hmm.
that feeling. Okay. All right. All right. And it was the same thing growing up with needles. And I know you've overcame that. And then we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I mean, it's just so interesting that, I didn't know anything about this. And when I was learning about you and just seeing the different, the ways that you handled the sensory things. And I remember just one thing when I first met your mom and we started dating, you used to have this little block that you used to play with. And your mom used to tell me that that was one of your stemming tools. Can you kind of explain the whole thing about the stemming tools and how you used those in your childhood to kind of manage your autism?
Yeah, so it's pretty common for people with on the autism spectrum to, have sort of like different sim devices, um, just to like soothe and sort of help navigate a lot of the stress that can come with different sensory experiences. And I still do have the blocks. They're still in my apartment.
Mm.
I don't really use them as much anymore, but I do still have them. I I like the blocks just because that they were smooth,
Mm-hmm.
but they had a bit of texture to them. They were wood and they weren't like finished or anything,
Mm-hmm.
so they had like a little bit of a nice texture. But was just very soothing to like just hold in my hand and just like rub with my fingers.
Yeah.
And then just the corners and the edges of the blocks were very defined. They were, I wouldn't say sharp, but they were kind of sharp.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it was like I could sort of play around with it and like feel the sharp corner and then go and just
Yeah.
sort of touch the flat surface of the block and get that like kind of difference. And it's just a very like calming sort of response. And that's what a lot of stimming tools are, is that they're just ways to alleviate some of the anxiety and stress that being in a certain situation or, having certain experiences can cause. And they just provide that sort of like, it's something that I think people who are not on the autism spectrum might sort of identify as like sort of a safety blanket. Maybe
Yeah.
when you were a kid growing up,
Yeah.
it's sort of that sort of like comforting feeling.
Got it. Okay. So let's talk about And this is a story that I've heard. I wasn't there at the time, but this is just an unbelievable story. I know that when you were growing up and your mom was going through a really hard time, I know it put a strain on your mom's marriage with your dad, and they ended up getting a divorce. But I know that when you guys were going through all your diagnosis stuff, back in Tennessee, that you actually had a doctor, and I don't know if you remember the doctor telling you this, but remember a doctor telling your mom that you were never going to even graduate high school. And I just couldn't believe when your mom told me that a doctor would ever say that. Do you actually remember that doctor telling you that back then?
I don't. But I don't really have a lot of like animosity or anything towards the doctor that said that
Hmm.
because it's hard to really like describe just how severe my presentation was when I was that age.
Right.
And I can understand that the doctor really just wanted to prepare my mom for what could be,
Yeah.
in my future.
Right.
And just make sure that she had like all the resources and tools necessary and that she took it seriously and that she,
Hmm.
understood that I might need care for the rest of my life,
Yeah.
because that's not something that I think a lot of parents are prepared for. And isn't even just related to autism, but any sort of severe disability, having a child that, maybe beyond your own lifespan is going to need care,
Right.
is something you have to prepare for very early on.
Yeah. That's
So I don't really, have a lot of bad feeling towards him for that. However, I do think that uh, it should be approached a bit differently, with a bit more. Uh, I'm not sure what
hope.
the right word
I
is
would
here, but
I would say hope, because I mean,
yeah.
from what I can get out of what your mom was telling me, is that the doctor basically told her that there was no hope for you. You weren't going to be able to graduate high school. And your mom like just said, you know what? Oh, hell no, this isn't going to happen. And she worked with you and had you in therapy. And I know she told me the stories of just repetition, repetition, repetition to get you to where you needed to be. And, and you're proving that doctor like flat ass wrong. I mean, you graduated from high school, in the top of your class, and you got a free ride to Miami of Ohio for your college degree, and you are now going to be a pharmacist at the University of Toledo. So, screw that doctor for telling your mom that, because that's not the right thing to tell anybody. You can always have hope for anybody with any kind of a chronic disease or condition or disability. I just, for a doctor to say that, write this kid off, she's not going to be able to get through school, is just, to me, I think is wrong. And you proved it. You proved me right that it's wrong to say that, because you're like going to be a freaking pharmacist in a couple of years. And you know what? Kudos to you, Maddie. I am so proud of you as a stepdaughter. And, you just show that just because you are on that spectrum, that it's not going to hold anybody. It doesn't have to hold anybody back. It's a lot of hard work. And I know you've put in a lot of hard work, and your mom put in a lot of hard work. But it is something that you can overcome. And you have totally proven that.
Oh yeah, I 100% agree. I don't think that any doctor should come out and say like this is what's going to happen for sure. I think that we've seen with, tons of different conditions, disabilities, illnesses and stuff that people are capable of quite amazing things, and to really like limit, you know, someone's prospective future based on a diagnosis early on in life, I think is quite wrong.
Yeah.
I think, especially in the medical field, you should always try to paint things in a realistic light, but to not, limit or say for certain that this is something that's going to going to happen when, I mean, time and time again, we've seen that people are just capable of quite amazing things and overcoming really great, you know,
Yeah.
adversity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can kind of piggyback that with my condition of MS. I mean, most people when they get that diagnosis of MS, they, like me, I thought I was screwed. I thought I was going to be in a wheelchair, within, a matter of years, and here I am, 27 years later, and I'm still walking. Not as good as I used to, but I mean, that's just the point that
Hmm.
whenever anybody gets that diagnosis, you can't quit because you never know how far you can go with any kind of a diagnosis, and you're proof of it. I'm proof of it, and there's a lot of people that are proof of it. That just because you get diagnosed with something doesn't mean that your life is over and you're screwed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that also is another point is like it you don't want to kill that sort of like hope, as you called it, um, in a patient or in the patient's family or stuff like that, because I think that's doing them a disservice.
Mm.
As a medical professional, you're supposed to, try and provide the best outcome for your patients. But when you're telling them that they're never going to amount to anything or they're not going to be able to reach certain milestones without, certainty of those facts, I think it's wrong to sort of cast that light on them and make them doubt themselves
Yeah.
because there's going to be a lot of challenges to overcome mentally when you have a disability or an illness of any sort that can limit potentially what you can do, and so you don't need another barrier like that.
Absolutely, Maddie. And you even said it that it affects your mental health, it's affected my mental health. 27 years old, and I get diagnosed with a chronic disease, and I eventually had to treat the mental health part of this disease. And I know that that you are handling your mental health with being autistic, and you manage that too, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, you're still a brilliant girl, and you're still very successful, but you still have your struggles with your mental health, and you understand that and you address it, and it's important to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think no matter what illness or disability you may have, I think it's important to be aware of the facts that there's going to be challenges in your life. I mean, even for someone who's completely perfectly healthy, challenges present themselves, and
Mm-hmm.
and there's no nothing wrong with asking for help and realizing that you need help to come to terms
Make it
what's
through.
happening in your life.
Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely, Maddie. Absolutely. So let's flip the switch now, Maddie. Let's talk about. I didn't know anything about autism when I met you, and I was probably 42 years old, and you didn't know anything about MS when you met me. You were 12 years old. So what did you learn about your mom dating a guy that had a chronic disease? Because I know that when you met me, I was still up and moving around pretty good. You couldn't even tell I had MS. What did you even know what MS was when you were 12? And if you didn't, how did you even learn about it?
Um, I don't know if I really knew what it was outside of maybe having heard of it before. Um, Really, it was a lot of, my interaction with you and then doing a bit of my own research that I found out, much about the condition. My mom, when she introduced me to you and we ended up, moving in eventually, she, told me that you have MS and that, you know, down the road that, eventually you might end up being in a wheelchair or,
Right. Yeah.
that things were maybe going to get worse for you in terms of your mobility and stuff like that
Hmm.
to just be aware of, which I also think, plays into my mom always tries to give me the best heads up and prepare me, for different things because that's what she's used to doing.
Right. Right.
as when I was a little kid. But
Yeah.
um, it was a lot of just reading about it, after learning that you had it
Yeah.
and that things could change in the future. It definitely made me curious, and I wanted to know about it just
Yeah.
to be prepared for that and
You know,
to
you
be there to support you.
Yeah, you asked a lot of questions too, Maddie, and I think that's important too, because if you don't ask questions, you're not going to learn. And I know that me and you used to have, and we still do, but I mean, we used to have a lot of good discussions when you were younger, just like about life. I would ask you questions about your autism, and you'd give me great answers just so I understood it a little bit better. And you'd ask me questions about my MS, and I would explain what I was going through. And I think that is so important for people just to ask questions, because that's the only way you're going to find out is if you try to learn, and the only way that you're going to learn is to either do the research on your own by reading or by talking to somebody that's actually going through what you're trying to learn about.
Absolutely. And I think that, is really important too, because you can do all the reading, you can read every, medical dictionary, get every, understanding of the disease at like a clinical level, but that's really not going to compare to talking to someone and, getting their perspective on what it's like to live with a certain, disease or illness. It's just going to be a completely different experience, and you're going to learn more that you can't get from just reading a textbook.
Yeah, absolutely. I try to tell people that all the time, that, you can read all you want. And I respect you because you're going to be a doctor, and you're reading all these books, but even the doctors that do all this school studying and all that, and you guys are smart as hell, it's still, you guys, I think, learn more from just actually talking to the patient and finding out what they're experiencing. I know that you deal with a lot of the drug side of it, with the pharmaceuticals and all that. And I think the patient input is so important, with even like with you guys learning how to describe or prescribe the medications and all that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we're taught is, and we practice a lot is patient interaction and just with pharmaceuticals specifically is patients will have different experiences with a drug or, a certain treatment. So, not every patient is going to follow a standard, book on what a drug is supposed to do or how they're supposed to react to it. So it's really important to, as a provider, listen to your patients and really take what they say, into account in their treatment, because they really know best of what's happening to their own body and in their own head. So
Yeah. Yeah, I wish every doctor thought that way, Maddie. Unfortunately, they don't. But I know that everybody has their own way of learning and interacting with their patients and all that. But I did, yeah, it's just so important. I think that doctor patient relationship. I know that I have one with my neurologist that it just makes me feel better. I mean, it makes me feel better that I actually have a doctor that I think that actually gives a shit about my MS, and he listens to me. And I think that's just really important. And I'm glad that you sound like you're going to be that kind of a doctor. And I know you will be, because you really do care about people. And I know that you really want to help people. That's why you went into med school, because your whole goal is, you want to help people that are going through the same type of situations that you're going through, and or that you went through. And let's talk about your med school now, because I know that me and you have had some really badass conversations about the whole pharmaceutical, and I've asked you questions just out of curiosity on how you guys are taught. And since I started doing this podcast with the talking to other people that have MS, I hear a lot of people that say that the doctors are getting kickbacks and all that with with our DMT meds, and that are cost $40,000. And can you kind of explain the way that you guys are being taught in med school, exactly if doctors are even allowed to do that? Because I know we had a conversation about that a couple months ago, and it was just so interesting listening to somebody that's actually going through med school to talk about that.
yeah, absolutely. So specifically as, being in pharmacy, it's well, you're a bit more closely related to the whole structure of drugs and uh, insurances and, providers, the whole relationship. And there are protections in place to prevent kickbacks in, in the medical field. So drugs are doctors are not allowed to receive kickbacks and stuff like that from prescribing certain drugs. However, just like any profession, there's going to be good doctors and bad doctors.
Right.
So it's not a preventative, and definitely the money is there. If someone would be interested in it, I mean, these pharmaceutical companies have
Yeah.
great power and influence and stuff.
Yeah.
But in terms of legislature, there is, I think it's called the anti-kickback statute
Mm-hmm.
that prohibits, I think it's specifically for federal healthcare. So that would be Medicare and Medicaid.
Got it.
Um,
In the United States. Yeah. Got it.
yeah, that prevents, receiving any sort of monetary or uh, any sort of reimbursement or any value gained from prescribing certain drugs or just providing certain treatments or care.
Got it. Got it. So, okay, Maddie, let me ask you this question, a pharmaceutical question, because these are things that I've always wondered. When people are given their DMT, and I've actually heard some doctors say, this is the only route to go. And then I have other people that are other doctors that say, hey, you can take your DMT on top of it with the supplements. And what are your thoughts as far as the actual meds that are prescribed as opposed to somebody looking the more holistic way of treating different conditions? What is your thought as being somebody that's going through pharmaceutical pharmacy school, and being taught one way? What are your thoughts on like different supplements and how they can help people deal with their chronic condition?
So I think as far as what doctors prescribe goes, it's not a hard and fast, this is the best, this is what works for everyone. There's a lot we don't know still. I think that's the biggest challenge with a lot of diseases and stuff in healthcare is that, especially like MS, which is a very complex condition, we just don't fully know how it works yet.
Yeah.
And so that influences, the care that we're able to provide. A lot of the drugs and stuff that are out to treat it at the moment are very new, and doesn't mean they're ineffective or, potentially come with extra side effects or anything. But because, I mean, there's plenty of trials and research and study and money devoted to these drugs to, have the data to support that they can help. But it's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Right.
Whereas what works for someone, might not work for someone else. And when you have a disease that is as complex and specific as MS, like patient specific, each patient kind of presents a little bit differently and progresses a little bit differently. It is a bit of a guessing game of what's going to work, and maybe a game of trial and error to see what the best treatments are for a certain patient.
Yeah.
And that'll change over time.
Yeah.
Like, what works at the start of disease might not work when things progress.
Right.
In terms of things holistics, I think the concern is that there's not enough data to support their recommendation from a medical professional standpoint. It's not to say that they don't work or that they're not, safe or effective.
Hmm.
It's just from you know, you're taught to use evidence-based medicine,
Right.
which is a whole set of methodology to use the data that we have and the research and to be able to understand it and then apply it to patient care to provide the best outcomes for patients.
Well,
And I think the problem with holistics, there's not that.
yeah, no, I understand that, but let me ask you this then, Maddie. I mean, you guys say everything's based on data. Where's the data when you got a drug like Ocrevus that can cause cancer with patients, but the data's there, but they're still prescribing that drug. So that's the part that I just don't understand with doctors. Like they're data driven, and they don't want to necessarily say that it's okay to do a supplement, but they're giving you a drug that could give you cancer too. So that's the part that I just don't understand.
Right. And I think that's specifically an issue with provider patient relations because it's always with any treatment, a lot of times it's a balance of risk and reward. And when prescribing a new treatment, we're going through a new therapy or treatment for a disease, there should always be a disclosure and an explanation of the risks that are associated with that treatment, whether it's a drug or a procedure or anything like that. I mean, I know you've had surgeries and stuff before, and I'm sure the surgeons have gone through with you like what the potential risks could be of those procedures.
All right.
And it should be the same thing with drugs.
It should be. It should be. Unfortunately, I don't think it is. I just know that. Well, I mean, I'll just use Tysabri. When I first got diagnosed with, or when I was first got on Tysabri, I did a real quick search on my own, and it was the PML. I mean that was the big concern. But it was really never mentioned to me by my neurologist. He's just, he basically just said, hey, we're going to put you on Tysabri now. And I had to do my own research on the PML, and then I started asking questions on it. So I get it. The doctors should, but I'm just saying, Maddie, they don't.
Oh yeah, no, I agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely taught that it should be a part of prescribing a new treatment and that discussion of risk and reward, especially with drugs like a lot of the disease modifying therapies and stuff like that, that can come with a lot of very serious, rare but serious side effects, like PML and
Yeah.
increased risks of cancer and stuff. And I'm sure you've probably heard some of the pharmaceutical ads, and at some point towards the end of the ad, they'll be like, "Oh, please talk to your doctor because there's a risk of this and this and this and this. You can cause this and this."
Right.
And they have to do that because of legal requirements, but that should also be something that your doctor has a conversation with you about. And I think a lot of times it might just get overlooked because it's just a pill, or it's just an injection, it's just this.
Yeah.
When it's never skipped when you have something like a procedure or surgery, or at least it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
But when considering like prescribing a new treatment, drug, pill, injection, whatever, I think a lot of times it just gets overlooked because it's just not seen as serious, even though that these are very, very serious things that can happen. But I think maybe some of it too is not wanting to scare people away from a certain treatment, but also that's not proper patient care. Like you have to be realistic and straightforward with your patients and tell them all the risks of something that they're putting in their body. And I mean, you can say that, the risks are, in the percentages or fractions of percentages, but you can't just ignore it because then, in your case, you go and you find out on your own and then you feel like you've been lied to or
Right.
misled, deceived about what you're taking, and that's just going to cause more anxiety and issues down the line.
Oh, I agree with you 100%, Maddie. And it's a common problem, that I talk with people all the time, and that's one of their things is that they're just like, he's just putting me on a drug, or she's just putting me on a drug. I don't even know what it is, and I don't know what the side effects are. And I'm just like, wow, that's crazy that your doctor's not telling you any of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Okay, here's my other question that I wanted to ask you, and I know that you got to get ready to go to work tonight at the hospital, but I wanted to ask you as a future pharmacist, what is your thought process on where MS is going to be as far as a cure? I mean, I've been doing this disease now for 27 years, and back when I started in '97, they said, hopefully there'll be a cure, in another 10 years, and it's 27 years later, and we're not there yet. But we now have 26 more DMTs, so they've gotten better. But where do you see a cure in the future in the pharmaceutical field? Me personally, I think it's going to be stem cells, but I want to hear what you guys are being taught and what your thoughts are on this future, doctor.
So I think it's hard to set out like a, timeline for something like a cure, um, because there's just so many unknowns still. Like we just don't know enough about the disease itself, and the causes. So it's hard to say, exactly when something like a cure might be available. Um, Along with the fact that getting different treatments and different therapies, it takes a lot of time. The process of getting drugs approved, and that's not even considering the development stages of like actual research into compounds for different drugs and stuff like that.
Right.
That on its own is its own uh, time-consuming process, but just the approval process of making sure a drug is going to be safe. The FDA really sets very high standards on the amount of research needed to prove that a drug is safe, not only safe but also effective in its treatment
Yeah.
before it reaches the market. So it's really hard to say about a cure.
Where do you think stem cells is going to play a place in it? Do you think that's where it's going to end up going?
I unfortunately don't have enough of a understanding on stem cell research and therapy at the moment to make a good, judgment call on that one.
Got it.
I think, this is it might be skeptical to say, but from some people, but I think AI is actually going to have a really big impact on um, therapeutics
Yeah.
and care.
Yeah.
I mean, we're already seeing AI now in diagnoses and stuff like that. And I know for a fact that it's being looked into and has been for years actually on determining the nature of pathology and stuff on what's causing these diseases that we haven't fully like elucidated yet. Just having a really large framework, basically to work off of and compare to, which is basically the way that AI works.
Yeah.
It just allows for basically faster, human association of different cause and effect things that happen in the body. And when you can sort of incorporate the incredibly complex system that the body is
Yeah.
into sort of a framework like that, it allows for just faster discovery of different
Yeah.
disease-causing mechanisms in the body. So I think once we fully understand what's causing diseases,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to lead us to a much faster track of potential cure in the future.
Got it. Got it. All right. And then my last question for you, Maddie, and this is the $1 million question. Do you think that pharmaceuticals are withholding cures on different diseases, whether it be cancer, MS, because I hear a lot of people saying, they probably have a cure, but, there's too much money in the meds. This is why they're doing this, blah, 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 blah. What is your thought process being a future doctor in the pharmaceutical field on that theory?
So I understand both takes. I definitely have enough skepticism in the world to see a possibility of something like, drug companies holding out cures and stuff like that because of the money and all that as like being a real possibility. I mean, the world's can be a pretty dark place at times.
Yep.
So it's not that I don't think that could be a real possibility. I think the logistics of it is that there's so much money that would be available. Imagine if Pfizer came out tomorrow and said they have a cure for cancer, a cure, not just a treatment, but 100% a cure.
Yeah.
This is something that kills people. And, it affects people of all social classes,
right,
all around the world. So there are no lengths that someone wouldn't go to get a cure for a life-threatening condition.
That's my feeling too, Maddie. That's my feeling too. But go ahead. Continue on with that, doctor.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think that, realistically, there would be much more in it for a pharmaceutical company to have a cure for a disease than to withhold it.
Okay, just I guess I have one more question. So just your thoughts, what if my drug cost $10,000 a month, and I was on this drug for, let's just use Copaxone. I was on Copaxone for 15 years. That drug was costing like $12,000 a month. And I'm not the only one on that drug. There's probably thousands of people on Copaxone at the same time making all that money. I mean, that drug has paid for itself probably a million times over, but it's still like outrageous. I don't understand why the drug prices don't fall when they come off brand name, when they go to generic. Why isn't there a drastic drop in that drug? And that's I think that's another part that's really frustrating for patients, is just to see the amount of money that's made off of these DMTs. It's just incredible. And all drugs in general. I just think that's the frustrating part for the patient side of it.
Well, I don't know if that's a shock, but it's also a really frustrating thing for the pharmacists too, that are trying to get people their therapies and their needed medications. It's really disheartening. When I was working as a pharmacy tech, in retail, and having multiple people a day come to the counter and not be able to afford their drugs that they need.
Right.
It's really sickening, and it sort of it'll turn you away from the profession just because you feel powerless to help these patients. It feels like there's something fundamentally wrong with the system, and honestly I think there is. That's going to be a big part of it, of drug costs. Is what people don't a lot of times understand is the way the relationship of insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, and then the intermediate middlemen of the PBMs, the pharmacy benefit managers. Really, it's a pretty, I wouldn't say it's overly complex, but it is a little bit of a, it's a system, and it has a few different ways that it works.
Yeah.
And different ways that companies will get, reimbursement and set the costs of drugs. But ultimately, the way that the insurance and health systems market works right now with relation to pharmaceuticals and drug companies, manufacturers, is that they pretty much have, I wouldn't say an unregulated, but a fairly free hand on being able to set the cost of drugs basically to whatever they want.
Yeah.
Now, there is, argument that there's a lot of money that goes into R&D, research and development of drugs
There it
and
is.
therapies and stuff. And a lot of it isn't recovered. So you have numerous amount of drugs that, go through development. And then once they get to the, testing and treatment trial phase is
Yeah.
they just fall through
Right.
for a number of reasons, or even after marketing, they just don't perform as well as pharmaceutical companies would hope. And
Right.
so there's a very big cost into developing these drugs, and especially for treatment or for diseases that are less common or more rare.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of times these conditions are the ones that are the more severe and life impacting.
Yeah.
But the more rare a condition is, the less money there's going to be, less potential for revenue from it. So there are things like, the Orphan Drug Act and stuff that can provide compensation for these companies to do research into these drugs that are, less likely to be profitable. But at the end of the day, it is a business, and they do have to, make money now.
Yeah.
It's easy to argue that their profits are more than is necessary and a bit,
It's crazy.
predatory.
It's crazy. I don't know. That's a whole nother discussion that'll just get me pissed off. Maddie, man,
Yeah, trust me.
I really want to appreciate you, sweetheart. I'm so glad that I got a chance to talk to you on this podcast. I know we've been trying to do this for a while, and your schedule is just so crazy with going to med school. But I really appreciate you coming on just to spread awareness about autism, to try to help people understand it a little bit better, and also you being blended in with an MSer and how that was with you, and just your experience. I really appreciate you, and I thank you for coming on here. And I will definitely invite you back on, especially after you get your doctorate degree finished. Then I can actually officially call you Dr. Maddie, and we can continue having a discussion, because you're so smart, and I just know that you will say it like it is, because I know Maddie, and she's just like her mom. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me on. I really, it's very, very touching. I appreciate being able to come on and do this with you.
I appreciate you, Maddie. All right. If anybody wants to follow me on Instagram, I am MS Michigan Man 64. You can follow me on TikTok, MS Michigan Man 64. You can find me on Facebook, Brian Wallace out of Brunswick, Ohio. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and I will talk to you later on the next episode. MS Michigan Man 64. I am out.